Hello and welcome to the July 9th edition of the Bubb Report. I am Rion Charles. The 5th and 6th form students at the private Trinity College in Mocha, Trinidad, who were denied the opportunity to participate in the graduation ceremony and receive their certificates, set off a national outcry in Trinidad and Tobago over hair grooming policies in schools. This firestorm spurred the Rowley-led PNM administration to enact the first of its kind hair grooming policy following consultations with stakeholders nationwide. The issue of hair grooming in public and private schools across the Caribbean highlights the tensions between strict colonial-era hair grooming legacies and the need to relax hair codes that disproportionately discriminate against hairstyles worn by children of African descent. In 2019, Leslie Morton Taylor sent a pre-action protocol letter to the principal of St. Stephenson's College in Trinidad after her 15-year-old daughter, Kalika Morton, was warned against wearing Bantu knots in school. In August 2020, shy of Emancipation Day, Jamaica's High Court ruled in favor of the Kensington Primary School in a litigation brought against it by the parents of a 7-year-old girl with dreadlocks.
That won't hold her down for long. And my daughter, I mean, she's really strong and she knows that she's pretty regardless of what anybody has to say to her. So she'll be fine. I will not be cutting my daughter.
You go through all of that and you reach a stage of 2020 where you hear people discriminated against I and I with locks, and even people are not Rastafarian with locks, which is, I can't find the right word to say, which is way behind time. It's like, it's so discriminatory that you can't even explain it really. You know what I'm saying? We have children, we have grandchildren, we have other children about coming in this world, and we won't tell them that you're not to be happy or beautiful or feel beautiful and know you're beautiful because of your natural hair. You know what I'm saying? They have children going to school with weeds, and every minute you see them hitting the head and all that kind of stuff from whatever, waxing it and whatever. We don't carry ourselves dirty. You know what I'm saying? We're very clean. Rastafarians are very extremely clean. Everybody know that.
This week, we discuss the evolution and management of hair grooming policies in Caribbean schools. The Trinidad and Tobago government aims to take the lead in dismantling the colonial-era policy while maintaining a collegial environment for students in public and private schools. Also in the report, as Grenada's south coast continues to expand and develop, the challenges of maintaining its pristine environment continue to be an issue for some residents in the area. On the True Blue side of Prickly Bay, residents have been raising the alarm about the unusually high levels of sewage discharge suspected to be from yachts in the area. They say the issue has been happening in varying volumes for over a decade. A few miles north of Prickly Bay is the issue of the proposed construction of an industrial boatyard. The Coral Cove Group in Lansapine applied for judicial review to the court with the intention of revoking the project, which was approved by the Physical Planning Authority. Some residents in Lansapine say that the new Physical Planning Board can revoke the permit without having to pay compensation to the developer, who they say has already violated the conditions under which the consent was granted. Finally, the Bubb Report pays tribute to Madonna Harford, who transitioned on Friday, July 7th after a prolonged battle with cancer.
The Minister for Health would have indicated to us earlier on that she was getting about 153 posts of registered nurses in the system. That has not happened.
Mrs. Harford served in different capacities in government, rising to the role of permanent secretary. After her retirement, she was elected president of the Grenada Public Workers Union and served as president of the Grenada Trades Union Council. We remember Mrs. Harford as a steadfast champion of workers' rights and an avid supporter of youth development. We thank her for her service to the people of Grenada and the Caribbean. We welcome our guests, Dr. Nyan Gasby-Dolly, Trinidad and Tobago's Minister of Education, Hayden Redhead, environmental activist, Christopher Husbands, General Manager of the National Water and Sewage Authority, Roger England, member of the Coral Cove Group, and Brian Grimes, President of the Grenada Public Workers Union. Here is our host, Dr. Kellon Bubb, with this week's editorial titled heralding the legacy of the late Madonna Harford. We thank you for joining us.
And I believe I was muted all along. And again, I have to do this all over again. I apologize, viewers and listeners, for this. But we are going to repeat the editorial because I do want to respect the time of the Minister of Education of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, who is here. As I was saying, this program is being live streamed on Trinidad and Tobago television. So we thank them for doing that on our behalf. But Minister of Education, Dr. Nyan Gasby-Dolly, welcome to the Bubb Report.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Absolutely. And certainly we were having this conversation for about 2 weeks when this
Yes.
incident emerged. And so
Yes.
we thank you for agreeing. And I want to thank your public relations person for really walking us through that process. Now, Minister Gasby-Dolly, as we said in the introduction, that incident at the Trinity College sparked a national outcry, but the debate seemed to have been polarized in many respects. There are those who say that the students should be following the rules and that the parents essentially were encouraging lawlessness, while there are others who say that the time has come for us to have a conversation rooted around relaxing some of those colonial era policies. Is that the sentiment on the ground?
I think those accurately capture the different variations of the conversation. The fact is that the ministry took the position that we support our schools and our principals with regards to the rules that they have and they must maintain at our school. Our society is based on our ability to keep our rules. However, so that's one aspect of it. However, the other aspect is, was the graduation the correct time to enforce these rules and, to precipitate a situation that actually played itself out at the graduation? And then the third dimension would have been, is it time to take a look at the rules? So there were actually three different types of scenarios swirling in that one situation. And so what the outcome of it was really dealing with two of them, meaning what happens at a graduation of the school, and of course, what happens in terms of the rules for hair and hair grooming and hair code.
Now, did those rules apply to the sitting of exams? Because those students were allowed to sit their exams.
They did. And, what we have to understand is the effect of COVID on our schools. And sometimes these issues are not coming to the fore. We speak about the learning loss and we do things to deal with the learning loss, but there were other things that happened. So one thing that happens is that boys grew their hair. In the 2 years, many of our students were away from school for 2 years. And at that time, the barbershops were closed. Different things were happening. And boys grew their hair. So the ministry's guideline is well groomed. But of course, schools are and were able to interpret that in different ways. So in the year that the students have been back at school, what the principal and the administration has been saying is that they have been working with the boys to enforce their rule, because their rule at that particular school is that the hair should have been short. So yes, the boys were at school for a year. Yes, there were instances of suspension. Yes, the school did speak to them about their hair and so on. And yes, they wrote exams. Yes, they participated in different events. And that is where the underlying question about, was the graduation the appropriate time, regardless of the fact, and it is a fact, that the school did say to parents and students that their hair should be following the school's hair rules at the graduation. So yes, they did sit exams.
Absolutely. Now, Minister, when that incident unfolded, you were one of those people, and that is what drew us to reaching out to your team on your Facebook page and through public comments by Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley. You indicated that the time has come for this conversation to happen. Yeah. And it appears as though outside of making those public pronouncements, you also held consultations with stakeholders in Trinidad and Tobago. Can you talk to us about what that process looked like and what was the nature of the feedback received as a result?
So what we did in Trinidad and Tobago, I agree that the time did come, because this issue has come up before. It's been a bubbling issue. But the fact is, in 2022, a lot of our students spent 2 years out of school. So when they came back into the classroom in April, that last term of the 2021-2022 academic year, they came out in April of 2022. And there were a number of disciplinary issues. And I think around the world, we experienced that kind of upheaval, because our students were now coming back to the classroom, getting back into that level of discipline. And though this issue came up before, even with my own son, when he went back out to school, his hair was long as well. And even when he went back out to school, we faced this challenge at the school he is going to, because the school rules did not allow for long hair. And so at that time, though, because we were dealing with learning loss, because we were dealing with principals now having to reintegrate students into the classroom who wouldn't have been in school for 2 years, it was not the appropriate time to deal with this conversation. However, our students have been successfully at school for an entire academic year after the COVID experience. And so now it is the appropriate time. It was the appropriate time to address this issue. And so what we would have done at the ministry level, we would have done our research, looked at what's happening regionally, happening internationally, and we met as ministry officials and technocrats, and we came up with a position. And so we advanced this position to our stakeholders before the actual meeting with the stakeholders, just before, so that they had a little time to get acquainted with our position for discussion as the ministry. And so when we met our stakeholders, a wide body of stakeholders, we discussed that position and their views on those positions and any other recommendations they would have had. And so based on the ministry's position, our stakeholders' views, we synthesized the hair code, and that is what we have advanced in the nation, and that is what we're going to implement.
So let us talk about these new hair codes. Are they guidelines or are they expected to be enforced? And the reason I ask this question is because Trinity College Mocha, they in a statement they indicated that they were going to stand by their position. In fact, they dug their heels in, if you will. So how will these guidelines be enforced? What do you say to academic institutions who have had these guidelines for eons?
The fact is, the Trinity College's position is that they are going to abide by their rules, and that's every school's position. And that is the ministry position, that students should abide by the rules of the school. What this hair code has done is it has expanded the range and really put some organization to what's been happening at the schools. At many schools, you would see students with long hair, but what's been happening, the ministry's guideline was only well-groomed. And that could be interpreted in several ways. So what the ministry has done...
Sounds very open-ended.
Yes, and that's how it's been for many years. So what the ministry has now done by introducing a hair code is actually put more detail to what can be considered at a school or what has to be considered at a school. And therefore, we have set a school based on some models that we have seen both locally as well as abroad. Engage a hair committee, parents, students, and the school's administration. And you now, within the context of the fact that you are allowing locks, twists, afro, braids, long hair, Trinidad is very multicultural, and therefore we have a range of hair types in Trinidad and Tobago. So on the basis of the fact that these are now to be allowed at school, you come up for your individual school with those granular details of, the length of, for example, the length of a girl's braids. For example, the length of hair, natural hair, you're going to allow. Are you going to allow it to be as long as it can be? Or is there going to be some restriction? The difference between girls and boys. What is okay for a boy in terms of the size of an afro? What's okay for a girl in terms of a weave? These granular details have to be determined by a school because it's a very unique school culture. We have over 850 schools in Trinidad and Tobago, 134 of them being secondary schools. And so you have a difference in culture. We have denominational secondary schools that are government assisted, therefore public schools. We have totally government schools. So, and within the denominational schools, you have the Muslim schools, the Hindu schools, the Anglican schools, the Roman Catholic schools, the Presbyterian schools. So you have a wide range of schools. So it's important for us in Trinidad and Tobago to still leave room for that individual school culture. So when the schools, on the basis of the national code, which must be kept, they are going to make their individual school hair rules, and that will speak more to the individual types of hairstyles that are allowed within the national context. And yes, they are to be observed.
What has been the reaction from the stakeholders that you have been meeting with?
Well, as I drew to the attention of our stakeholders in our introduction, the well-groomed guideline of the ministry has been interpreted in different ways in our schools, and they have their rules. However, any school that has a rule right now that's hair has to be short for males, that rule is generally being observed and honored in the breach. I've been visiting schools since our schools have reopened. I've been to over 200 of our schools, and I can tell you that there are in many of our schools boys with long hair. And so what this is actually doing is bringing some organization to what exists. And so there's been really general support for the measure because we've understood that societal norms have changed, they have evolved, and therefore we must evolve along with them, keeping the principles of it. So it's well groomed, neat, clean. These are subjective, but these are the main things that we want to ensure our schools, our students conform to. So there's been general acceptance and agreement in our meeting. The stakeholders were very open about the different recommendations they would like to suggest, and we did take that into consideration as we crystallized the hair code. And so we're looking forward to that level of support, and they have been open about their support for this measure.
Now, let us talk about, again, and a lot of this seems to be, again, subjective in terms of length. I see one viewer is saying, well, how do you determine how short the hair should be? How do you determine, cropped, half 1 inch, 2 inches, etc.? But that's one of the nuances there because this is a nuanced conversation. But one of the things that you articulated to me on background was that you in your research you found that there was no unifying policy on such an issue. So it would appear as if Trinidad and Tobago is attempting to lead the way in respect of putting a policy in place in line with what I would propose would be a sort of a post-colonial way of treating with notions of hair grooming. Yes.
Mm-hmm. We've looked at, in the region, we've seen Anguilla in 2022, they would have introduced a hair code. We've looked at across the international spectrum, there's the Crown Act, the Halo Act. We've looked at Thailand. There's a lot going on in Thailand in terms of their students and what they would like to do in terms of revolutionizing their own hair codes. So it's not limited to our region. It's international, where you have students looking for that level of agency and self-expression. And within our context in Trinidad and Tobago, we are putting things in place that suit our context. We don't want our students necessarily to just have to come to school with their hair in any type of form, but we don't want to restrict them. And especially as we have a multicultural and multi-ethnic society, we don't want to restrict them from a level of self-expression. And so we have looked to put something in place that works for us, looking at what's happening regionally and internationally, but working for Trinidad and Tobago's society. And it's important for us too to have the students have an input. And that's one of the critical areas where we want our students to be able to have that level of agency, to have a say into what happens at a school. And that's why the ministry's guidelines are broad as they are and don't seek to go into those granular levels of detail. These things are best left to the school, meaning the principal, the students, the administration, and parents to come up with those granular details. And we are sure that when students do this, they will be the ones to police and to buy in because they've had a chance to have a say about what they think is reasonable for self-expression and still within the context of neat, clean, not distracting, and really disciplined in our schools.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And the fact that you are getting student input, I suppose that would be the student leaders at the various institutions, prefects, scouts.
So I would expect that the schools and the principals would make those decisions. All schools have a prefect system, and so we expect that. Most schools have a PTA, Parent Teachers Association, so we would expect to see those persons. And the National PTA Association was a part of our stakeholder consultations, and so we expect that at every level they would be involved in ensuring that their members are a part of that discussion, and that's been circulated to the principals that this is the composition. So we are looking forward, and we've seen it work at one of our prominent schools in Trinidad and Tobago, that coming together of the students and the teachers for the most workable outcome that I think the students are very pleased with, because they have that level of agency and they have a voice.
Mm-hmm. Have you been able to consult and speak with the students, the students who were impacted at Trinity College, Mocha, the students, the parents, and how are they doing? Obviously, graduation, it's a capstone moment for anyone. I remember my graduation day from the presentation college in Grenada. We do have a presentation college in Grenada, viewers in Trinidad and Tobago.
Yeah.
But what conversations have you had with them?
I haven't had, as a minister, I haven't had any conversations directly with the parents and the students of Trinity College. However, I've seen their responses, and they've been very open on social media about the experiences, and the actual contributions from the students have varied. So I've seen students who said, they felt embarrassed. I've seen students who said, we knew what was going to happen. We were warned before, but we made the decision. I've seen contributions from parents who've also said that, yes, they were aware, but they were willing to take that stand at the time. So I've seen the principal's report as well. So coming directly to the ministry, as well as what they released to the public. There were two different documents. So I've seen a lot of different sides of the conversation, and a lot of that would have, contributed to our considerations as we would have dealt with this here code.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Now, Minister, I want to switch gears a bit. In Grenada, we're having a conversation around universal secondary education. Our Prime Minister in Grenada, he indicated that no child should be left behind in really fully implementing universal secondary education. Now, Minister, the first question I have in respect of the universal secondary education policy in Trinidad and Tobago is, are all children advanced to the high school level? And what methodology does your ministry have in place to ensure that those students who might be quote unquote slow or who have different learning styles are actually catered for when they get to a high school?
So in the year 2000, I believe, we would have drawn the line in the sand in Trinidad and Tobago with regards to universal secondary education. But for some time before that, you did have mainly all students getting to secondary school. At this point, all of our students go to secondary school. However, our students do entrance level placement exam. So we call it the secondary entrance assessment in Trinidad and Tobago, where you do a test to determine if you pass for schools of your choice. So students are allowed to choose 4 schools at the end of primary school, and then they do this SEA. And that, if you do very well, you get into your first choice or your second choice, third choice, fourth choice, etc. So we do have that placement examination, high stakes placement examination system operating in Trinidad and Tobago. So all of our students go on to secondary school, with the exception of those who are under 13 years old and who have not made over 30% in the examination. If you fall into that category, then you have to resit. You're offered a chance to resit the examination at your primary school. So basically you repeat a year. And so those students, for example, maybe 3% on average of students would have to resit the examination. And so they stay back in primary school and they do it over. All of the other students are promoted to the secondary school level on the basis of their choice. And if they did not score the marks to get into any of their choices, then they are placed at a school that is closest to them. So you call it the zoning process. Placed in a school, a government school that's closest to them. And so what happens is, at our secondary school, especially because of what happened with COVID and the exacerbation of the learning loss at COVID, we have selected 26 of our secondary schools that are the lowest performing at the CXC level, and who would get most of the students who are under 30, but have to be promoted to the secondary school because of age. We would now, in those schools, we are implementing the remedial education program. That program deals with the type of teaching they get. It also deals with the syllabus for Forms 1 and 2, so that we are able to give those students a chance at gaining their primary school skills up to Form 2 of the secondary school, because you see it as very important that those fundamental skills are not skipped over. So their syllabus has to be a different syllabus, catering for them to be able to do what is formally a primary school leaving exam in Form 2, because those skills are important. We also have life centers in Trinidad and Tobago, where we have students who, for one reason or the other, are not at the level of secondary school. And so we have students promoted to the life centers where they do vocational skills and learning. We also have the serval centers where students can also pursue vocational learning up to that level. And then after that, we have tertiary level and post-secondary institutions that do technical and vocational training. So we have YTEP, we have NESC, and so students can pursue a technical level coming out of the secondary schools. But at the secondary level, we do have the life centers, and then at the secondary schools, we have a different curriculum to be followed for some students based on their percentage in the SE, which is the placement exam.
Absolutely. And you mentioned the final question around that zoning. I suppose students' placements in secondary schools depends on the zone in which the district or in which they live.
No, it doesn't. It actually depends on
Okay.
their grade and their choices. So they
Okay.
have 4 choices, and if they score enough to place into, well, it's a complicated system that grades our students and places them. So if you have the top scores, then you can go to the schools that you choose. If you, of course, more students would choose a particular school than can be accommodated. So there may be students who may score level at the level to get into a school, but if the school is full because persons scored higher than that, then they come to their second choice. So as they come down in the choices based on their performance, if they do not get into any of the schools they've chosen, then they will be placed into a secondary school that is closest to their home address. So that's where the zoning comes in. So a student from south of the island is free to choose a school that is north of the island. Once they score the correct grades and they can get into the school, then they are free to attend that school. And that happens in a lot of cases.
Okay, absolutely. Minister, is there any final comments? I want to thank you and your public relations personnel for really facilitating this today for us. And of course, Trinidad and Tobago Television in the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, who are also carrying this live on TTT television. Minister?
I just want to say that, the education system has to be very fluid and dynamic because we're living in very different and changing times. And so the Ministry of Education is committed to serving our population. Our mandate is to, provide quality, modern, and relevant education to our students. And that is exactly what we will continue to do as we work with all of our stakeholders in Trinidad and Tobago to influence the education, not just in our country, but also in the region.
Absolutely. Viewers and listeners, Dr. the Honorable Nyan Gasby-Dolly, who is the Minister of Education in the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, she joined us today to talk about new policy in respect of hair grooming that the PNM administration is about to roll out for the new school year. On the back